I know it will just take a few minutes for folks to populate over from the waiting room, and then we'll get started with our conversation. But the timing is excellent for this discussion with Nina about her new book, How to Lose the Information War, Russia, Fake News, and the Future of Conflict. As many of our attendees today are well aware, the center has been focusing on quite a few national security topics lately that touch on Russian activity. We have framed our discussions under the concept of this new great power struggle. We spend a considerable amount of emphasis on technology competition with China, but we also focus quite a bit on competition with Russia, dealing with Russian capabilities, whether it comes to countering nuclear arms and arms control discussions, preparing the United States for trying to maintain our preponderance in space, and dealing with Russian anti-satellite capabilities and hypersonic weapons, thinking about intelligence operations and how we were able to gather intelligence and counter Russian intelligence operations in this modern era. But a lot of us obviously have been focused over the last several years critically on this area of mis and disinformation, Russian interference in not just in US elections, but in our very sort of public faith in our democratic system as a whole. These are all critical areas for us to understand, and that understanding leads into a much more successful program focus for us. So again, we're happy to have you, Nina, with us this morning. What I'd like to do is offer you the opportunity to talk to us a little bit about the process, that your background that led you to write the book. You have some pretty incredible experiences in Ukraine and in studying other areas of Eastern Europe that have had experience with Russian operations. And you have come to some conclusions in the book which are very helpful for our thought process, and I'm hoping that you'll share some of those with us before we go on to Q&A. Just as a logistical reminder for participants, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to type a question anytime you would like, or you can raise your electronic hand by using the participants panel, the raise hand button, and Dan Mahaffey is going to organize a Q&A session immediately upon the conclusion of Nina's opening remarks. With that, Nina, thank you again for joining us, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Representative Nye. It's truly an honor to be with you all today. I have been doing a lot of these book events, but it's really great to be in such a conversational format with folks that I know care about this issue. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to do the obligatory thing and hold up my book. So you can find this pretty much anywhere books are sold. I would encourage you to pick it up from your local bookstore. But I would love to tell you a little bit about how the book came to be. So as Representative Nye mentioned, I served as a Fulbright Public Policy Fellow in Ukraine from 2016 to 2017. That was a pretty pivotal year for disinformation, of course, but Ukraine had been experiencing disinformation for a long time, of course, in the Soviet era, but certainly since the Euromaidan revolution in 2013, 2014, things really came to a head, particularly with Russian online disinformation. And so as revelations about Russian interference in our US election came to light, I was in Kyiv watching this from afar, and it really seemed to me that, it seemed like we were encountering all of this for the first time, that we hadn't really learned the lessons of our allies in Central and Eastern Europe from 2007, starting with Estonia, going to present day in Ukraine and many of the other countries right on Russia's border. And I think, we tend to have this hubris as Americans that we are supposed to be the teachers, we're supposed to be the ones lending assistance, but I really think there is a lot to learn from our allies in Central and Eastern Europe. So that's what was the impetus for the book. It took 3 years of research and reporting, and I took a lot of trips to the region, capitalizing on the contacts that I had made while I was working in Ukraine as a strategic communications advisor to the foreign ministry under my Fulbright. And I really wanted to bring to bear those experiences that our allies in Estonia, Georgia, Poland, Czech Republic, and Ukraine had. All of these countries have had pivotal events and kind of challenges related to disinformation, and they've all taken slightly different tacks in responding. And there are a few things that I think really connect all of them that I'll go through, but first I'll just give a kind of brief overview of the case studies, and if there's any further questions about them in detail, I'm happy to talk about them, but they're pretty complex, so we'll just give the 40,000 foot view for now. 2007 in Estonia is what I view as the start of the modern information war. Many of you are probably familiar with the hacking and DDoS attacks that happened during that pivotal spring in Estonia. But fewer people are aware of the what I call beta disinformation event that happened at the same time surrounding a Soviet statue that was moved from the center of Tallinn to the outskirts of the city. The Russian media, along with the intelligence services and some of the Russian diplomatic corps, really pushed a narrative and amplified existing grievances from the ethnic Russian community in Estonia, which makes up about 25 to 30% of the population. And really kind of made them much more active than they had been earlier than 2007. So around this monument especially, it became kind of a flashpoint for all of the grievances of the ethnic Russian community, who some of whom didn't have citizenship. They had different educational and career opportunities because of their backgrounds. And so these are real, grievances that society has. And I think this is a key point for many Americans when we talk about fake news. Very little of successful disinformation is actually cut and dry fakes that are just absolutely blatantly false. It's usually grounded in a kernel of truth, usually something highly emotional. And that was the case in Estonia. So riots broke out. There were these DDoS attacks that made Estonia quite famous for its kind of cyber defenses. But the interesting thing in Estonia is that they were able to turn this around. If you look at Estonia today, yes, some of these grievances still exist. There is a bit of de facto segregation of the ethnic communities still, but that is really on a downtrend, I would say. If you look at a lot of the polling, most Russians are taking on a more European, more Estonian identity, particularly the younger generations. And this is because the Estonian government is investing in people. They're not just, putting up cyber walls. It's about investing in the things, in repairing these fissures in society that Russia has often exploited. So that's education. They've created, for instance, a Russian language section of the famous university, Tartu University, that is just for Russian speakers. They're investing in integration opportunities for the Russian community, investing in Russian language media so that there is a bit more of a choice between what's coming over the border from St. Petersburg and what's available in Russian in Tallinn and in the rest of the country. And they're also investing in bringing the government to the Russian population. So previously, it was kind of like, if they don't want to interact with us, that's fine. They have opportunities to do this. If we build it, they will come. That's kind of not the case anymore in Estonia. There's a lot more proactive outreach from the government to the Russian population. For instance, the presidential administration moved on a short sabbatical for a couple of weeks in 2018 to Narva, where a lot of the ethnic Russians who live in Estonia are located. So this sort of proactive outreach is really important. And I think, again, it underlines the understanding in the Estonian government that it's not just a threat from Russia, it's our internal vulnerabilities that are being manipulated by bad actors, including Russia. The book then goes to Georgia in 2008, and of course looks at the 5-day war between Russia and Georgia and the way that information climate kind of laid the groundwork for Russian entities like RT and Sputnik to really be pumped up and invested in by the Russian Federation. But it also takes us up to present day. So one of my research trips to Georgia happened last summer, while there was this huge protest movement that broke out spontaneously because a Russian member of parliament was in town for an Orthodox summit that was held in the Georgian parliament. He sat in the Speaker of Parliament's chair. And of course, Georgia, 20% of the country is still occupied by Russia. So Georgians were incensed about this. And this was kind of a pivotal display of how Russian influence, despite the animosity between these two countries, has gradually crept back in to Georgia through cultural vectors, like this Orthodox assembly, and through monetary vectors, because the new ruling party in Georgia has quite close monetary ties. So the point in this chapter is that, you know, their influence exists offline as well. It's often paired with the online influence campaigns, but we have to understand that they are only one vector of many in the Russian toolkit. Then we look at Poland, which for me was a really interesting chapter. I am Polish American. I also have some Ukrainian blood, but as you can tell from my last name, lots of consonants, very Polish. And I've been going to Poland for a long time. Every time I go, you know, people tell me we're inoculated to Russian influence. You know, we understand what Russia is about. We don't need to be worried about undue Russian influence here in Poland. And if you look at their national security documents, that's true. But if you look at what happens in practice and what has happened since 2010, things are a bit different. And Poland actually is a really great lesson for the United States right now, because the political environment has gotten so polarized there that polarization kind of undermines any of these good investments that are being made at the national government level. So for instance, I underline in the book how the ruling Law and Justice Party has been shown to actually engage in disinformation on its own people. I underline the fact that, you know, disinformation is bad no matter if it's coming from outside of the borders or within your borders. There needs to be, you know, equitable countering of all this malign influence, because it undermines democracy at its core. But also the fact that this polarization is hastened by some certain politicians in Poland means that Poland is more open, more vulnerable to outside malign influence. And in fact, Russia is using many of these vectors to do just that. Then the book goes to the Czech Republic, where it looks at the first domestic operation that was created just to counter Russian malign influence, online influence, and disinformation. This is a very wonky chapter that I'm sure many people in DC will appreciate, that kind of follows how this Center Against Terrorism and Hybrid Threats, which is what it's called, was created, and how, because it was associated also with the terrorism portfolio in the Ministry of Interior, it was able to kind of gain some steam. But then when people figured out that it was going to be working on disinformation, Czechs were not very happy about that. They viewed that as potential censorship. The president of the Czech Republic himself, Miloš Zeman, actually called out the center because he often engages in some of these tactics, and he didn't want them censoring him. They weren't going to censor anyone anyway, but their mission has been a bit undermined because of the way that they branded themselves originally, which I think offers some interesting lessons to any federal agencies that we might stand up that are working on disinformation as well. And then finally, the book looks at Ukraine's referendum in the Netherlands in 2016, when Ukraine was attempting to ratify its association agreement with the European Union. The Dutch, who are famously Eurosceptics, really didn't want this to happen. Unfortunately, it came in the wake of the MH17 disaster, which killed many Dutch citizens, thanks to the Russian missile, which shot down MH17. And the Dutch were none too happy about this, and Russia saw an opportunity with this referendum to not only undermine Ukraine's support in the European Union and its Euro-Atlantic aspirations, but also undermine European cohesion. And so this is a really interesting, multifaceted campaign where not only did they create false narratives online that they spread through RT and Sputnik, the Dutch versions of those that then made their way into the mainstream through, interestingly, both the left and the right of Dutch politics, which were involved in the referendum. But they sent operatives to town halls posing as Ukrainians. They funded Dutch political parties who were working on the referendum, and they created some viral videos that claimed to be Ukrainians who were threatening Dutch people. And Ukraine was able to do very little about this. You know, they were invested in strategic communications. They were trying to put forth a very positive narrative about Ukraine in the Netherlands, about all the trade links and contributions Ukrainians had made to Dutch society, but it really could not compete with this very, again, emotional, visceral narrative that Russia capitalized on that was already present in the Netherlands at that time. And unfortunately, the referendum did not go in Ukraine's favor. The association agreement wasn't automatically ratified, and they had to seek a diplomatic solution. But I think this is another interesting case study, particularly for folks in the national security and defense realms. I often hear at conferences and things, you know, if we just have a good, if we find a good narrative, if we tell a good story, we can win hearts and minds. And I think it's going to be a lot more difficult than that. So what can we do? The countries in the book that have made good investments that are, I think, you know, ones that I would consider at least partially successful, have all honed in on people. So Estonia did that. Ukraine has done that to some extent. They've had some pretty successful media literacy and education programs in Ukraine that educate people about, you know, oligarch influence on the media, how to avoid emotional manipulation, this sort of thing. The Czech Republic, the Center Against Terrorism and Hybrid Threats, although it hasn't been as successful in its debunking, has trained a lot of civil servants on how to recognize and combat disinformation. These are the types of investments that unfortunately are generational. It makes it really hard to get past, you know, any legislative body that's only thinking about the next election and not something, you know, 10 years on the horizon. But these campaigns, these disinformation campaigns, have been generational. If you look at Russia, again, it's been doing this in its near abroad for the past 13 years. Even the campaigns in the United States started much earlier. They started earlier than the 2016 election. They started in, you know, 2013, 2014 that we have evidence of, right? So we need to make those same sort of generational investments in closing the fissures in our societies and keeping the human element very present in our responses. It's easy to securitize this discussion, but we need to bring it outside of the national security community to the Department of Education, for instance, to, you know, libraries and civil society organizations, because those are the folks who have credibility with, you know, real Americans who are dealing with these issues on a daily basis. The second issue that I think we need to understand, and which comes through in these case studies, is that there is a homegrown element to disinformation, especially lately as we see these social media platforms starting to gradually, I don't want to give them too much credit, put up some barriers to manipulation of their platforms. Malign actors are really going around those. They're finding ways to launder information through authentic voices, which makes it very difficult to crack down and do, you know, content moderation on those voices if they're not breaking terms of service through inauthentic behavior or things like that. And this was true in every case study, even in those, you know, that are a bit less social media present, like in Estonia. Social media didn't really exist in 2007, at least there. But there's still that homegrown element. And so we need to, again, figure out ways to grapple with this that does not impinge on freedom of speech. And I think that goes back to the education and investment in repairing the fissures in our societies that are manipulated by bad actors. And then the third and final lesson, of course, is something I mentioned before with regard to Poland. We cannot fight foreign disinformation if we're embracing those tactics ourselves. And I think that is just something that needs to be repeated over and over. Disinformation is not a partisan issue. It is a democratic issue. It affects all of us equally. It affects participation in the democratic process, because when you are wading through this unprecedented flow of information, online or offline, the idea is to flood the zone and make people disengage. And that's very, very bad for our democracy overall. And, you know, the Russians, the Chinese, they don't have a lot of scruples when it comes to who they're supporting, especially Russia. They're very happy to support both sides of the equation, turn us against one another, and again, get people to disengage there. So I think that's a really important point. It's something I'm really trying to drive home ahead of the election, because disinformation already is starting to play a huge role. And I I really want to see a return to equitable democratic discourse. And I think that in part that's up to all of us by demanding that of our elected officials, no matter what party they are from, no matter where you are geographically. It's something every American should be able to get behind. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions. Again, thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, Nina, thank you so much for your descriptions, for sharing your expertise and your learnings from your time in Eastern Europe, and looking at how Russian activities have played out in several case studies that are very useful for our focus here at the United States. I wanted to pick up just on the comment that you ended with, and perhaps I could ask the first question, and then I'll turn it over to Dan to moderate some audience Q&A. But I'm very interested in your thoughts. I think you stated very well the challenge that we face here in the United States. There are some parallels with some of the countries that you studied in your book, namely institutional skepticism here, hyperpolarization you mentioned was a parallel with Poland, an incentive problem with actors in politics who are not unified in their interest in either ceasing the use of disinformation in the American political context themselves, or really taking a bona fide effort to prevent outside influence that might serve their ends in some way, even accepting the downsides that come with that. And I think a lot of us were disappointed when the Mueller probe process didn't end in a unification of the American sort of discourse around this idea of how to counter foreign interference, and instead became kind of something that became very hyperpolarized and looked at it from a very partisan lens. And I'm interested just to ask you, based on your experience studying these other countries, if there are things that we can practically do, understanding all these challenges that you have laid out in terms of the American political environment right now. Are there practical things that you saw work? Are there either disincentives or actions that deterred Russia in other instances, or were there domestic lessons learned that were applied that you think might help us in our effort in the United States to overcome this problem?
Yeah, that is a great question and great observations. I think the most important thing when you look at the most resilient societies, and those aren't always covered in the book, it is how to lose the information war after all. Those are societies like Sweden and Finland that have really invested in resilience building over generations. So Sweden, for instance, has sent out pamphlets to all of its citizens talking about what to do if crisis or war comes. And it talks about, stocking up on necessities and things like that, things that would be helpful during coronavirus, actually. But it also has a panel on disinformation, and not to be skeptical of your information sources, to question what someone's motives might be, what an outlet's motives might be if you feel yourself being emotionally manipulated. And that's coupled with investments that they've made generationally over educating people about media literacy, digital literacy, et cetera. I think those are really key. Finland does a similar thing where they've begun their media literacy training for kids at age 5. So they show them like toy commercials, and they say, this isn't just, fun content for you to watch on Saturday morning. This is a commercial and it's advertising to you. And I think we could all benefit from that. But often when we talk about media literacy in the American context, there's a tendency to immediately pivot to speaking about education for school age kids. And I think it's really important to underline that we need to reach the voting age population as well. And how you do that is a little bit tricky, but I do think there are incentives that the federal government can offer, again, for libraries and civil society organizations that are pursuing nonpartisan media literacy and digital literacy education. And the Czech Republic has invested in a program that reaches out to elderly people and shows them how to FaceTime with their grandchildren and things like that, but also sneaks some media literacy in. I call that the peas and the mashed potatoes approach. There's a lot of stuff that we can do there. I think we can also incentivize the social media platforms, which have a ubiquitous access to most Americans' lives, to invest in this stuff, really fulsome investments, because you'll look on their websites and they say, oh, we spent $2 million on media literacy efforts this year, but there are millions and millions of Americans on those platforms. So they're maybe spending, you know, less than a cent per American in order to do that media literacy outreach. So I think we could incentivize that. Either through grants, or the British government is actually considering, if they find social media platforms to be in violation of some new legislation related to data privacy, they're starting to consider using those fines toward a government media literacy program. So there are some interesting workarounds there, but again, it's an investment that we need to make now. I know Senator Klobuchar, for instance, has had a bill in committee for a long time dealing with some of these issues, and it's been stuck there. In addition to, you know, the simpler stuff like the Honest Ads Act, which has of course been stuck in the election security graveyard for the past couple of years, and that's low-hanging fruit that we should all be able to agree on, that we want our online political ads to have the same transparency level that the stuff offline on print, TV, and radio does. That's good for everyone. More information about how we're being targeted, why we're being targeted, I think is something that every American should want. And that sort of transparency in other layers of the social media ecosystem would be really, really important as well. Other countries haven't gotten there yet. I think we are abdicating our role as the headquarters of most of these companies with the most legislative impact that we could have on them by having not done any regulation yet. I want regulation to be smart, but we could have done something over these past 4 years when we realized how big the extent of the problem was. And I've seen in cases like Ukraine, for instance, even though Ukraine is Facebook's third fastest growing market, they have a really hard time reaching Facebook's policy folks when they have problems, and they have plenty of problems to deal with there. So we need to set that democratic standard of regulation for the rest of the world. And I think we are squandering precious time that could really help mitigate this problem. It won't eradicate it. I have no rose-colored glasses on about that. Russia will continue to do this and find loopholes and ways to exploit the system, but at least there will be consequences when that is happening, rather than right now, which is just kind of a free-for-all.
Right. No, thank you. There are many layers to your answer that are very interesting, and I think we at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress very much relate to your sense of urgency on the question. So I appreciate your answer. Let me turn it over now to Dan Mahaffey, because I know we have several audience questions, and I'll let Dan get those to you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to those of you who have submitted your questions. Builds on some of the comments you've already made, but the concept of how we would build a whole of society response to state-sponsored disinformation, and you talk about some of government education, but what also can the role of media, the private sector, other players in this struggle?
Sure, I'll start with media. I am a strong proponent of public broadcasting. I think it is pretty embarrassing that the United States only spends $3 per person per year on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. When you look at statistics for trust in the UK toward media, especially toward the BBC, you'll find that nearly 60% of Brits trust the BBC in a time of crisis. And I can't think of a single source of information here in the United States that would retain that level of trust, or that even has that level of trust on a normal day, let alone with a period of crisis. So I think investing in public sources of media, journalism as a public good, is only a good thing. Especially if you look at the news deserts in the United States. Sometimes NPR and PBS stations are the only local news in those areas. We all have read the statistics about how many states have accredited reporters on Capitol Hill these days, and it is a dwindling number, and that's very sad. I view local news as the connective tissue between people and what's going on in the nation's big cities, what's going on in the policy community, how all of that is interpreted for the lens that they understand, that fits their lives and their daily experience. And that's what public broadcasting does. So I think, investing in that, of course, we're never going to get to a BBC level. That's just, Americans have an issue with that, and that's fine. But I think we could be investing more, particularly in this time of kind of media upheaval, mainstream media upheaval, thanks to the digital landscape. Regarding the private sector, so outside of the regulatory discussion, I think there needs to be a more full-throated effort by the social media companies to keep their mission statements at heart rather than their bottom line. You know, Facebook says they want to connect people. They're a place for democratic discussion. And I should add, I pick on Facebook a lot, but this applies equally to all of the large social media platforms. And yet, you know, what we've seen recently, particularly in closed spaces on the internet, is that these platforms are basically radicalizing people. We've seen this with YouTube algorithms. We've seen this through Facebook groups. I wrote a piece a couple of, gosh, it was probably 6 weeks ago now, in Wired with Cindy Otis, another disinformation researcher and former CIA analyst. We looked at how you can join a group that is, for instance, about alternative health, which a lot of people are doing these days related to coronavirus. And it might have some anti-vax messages in there. And once you join that group, on your Facebook sidebar, you'll see suggestions for other groups that you should join. And they include QAnon conspiracies, white supremacist groups, false flag conspiracy theory groups. And this just goes on, this sort of suggestion algorithm. And this, you know, radicalization of people, and you'll get notifications from all those groups because groups are now the kind of backbone of Facebook's business model. They want you to have your digital living room. But I actually view all of this as a digital creepy basement. There's lots of positive stuff that's going on, but there's also a lot of really icky stuff that now is away from the eyes of journalists and researchers, et cetera. So they need to stop that incentivization just for profit. And they know this is happening. We know this from a Wall Street Journal investigation that broke in June as well, that they've done internal research on this stuff and decided to ignore it. That's really important that they stop that incentivization and then start to educate people. Again, they have ubiquitous access to our lives. If they can remind me to bring an umbrella because it's going to rain, they can, you know, share some good information about how to, you know, create friction in your informational environment and think before you share, those sorts of things. And then, well, I'll stop there for now. Get some more questions in.
Well, one question that came up from the audience, I think that's a direct follow-up to what you're saying there, is to what extent are disinformation sites subsidized by platforms' ad spend programs?
So in terms of the monetary disinformation, the person who's asking the question is probably thinking about the Macedonian teenagers who made a big splash in 2016 by, I think they made over $1 million from Facebook ads that referred people to their kind of fake news sites, and they were cut and dry fake news with sensationalist articles about all the presidential candidates, especially Secretary Clinton, and they made tons of money off of that stuff. So there's certainly a referral issue there, and Facebook, I've seen this in Ukraine time and time again, even if advertisers aren't meeting the criteria that they need to for political ads or for other stipulations based on Facebook's terms of service, the way the ad platform works is that they get approved for the ad and it will run, and people are spending money getting clicks to their sites, eyeballs on their content, and then after the fact, Facebook will see, oh, this is actually breaking our rules, and take it down. And I've still never gotten them to answer the question, what happens to that money that they made in that time? In Ukraine, I tracked one page that was constantly breaking the rules during the presidential election in 2019, the one that elected Volodymyr Zelensky. But because Facebook gives a range on its ad transparency platform, it's impossible to pin down the actual amount, but it was between $70,000 and $200,000 of ads that were eventually taken down, but ran for a period of time. I mean, that's not peanuts, especially in Ukraine. So yeah, there's a referral problem, and some of this is getting kind of brought up by the recent Stop Hate for Profit campaign that has been boycotting Facebook this month. And I think there's some movement on their end in terms of referrals. Google is obviously a bigger player in the ad referral game, and nobody really talks about them, which is a problem. And it's partially because they're so secretive about their data. They don't do the same sort of transparency and takedown reports that the other platforms do, which is the thing I wanted to mention before. So this is all tying up nicely. In terms of transparency, the platforms can do a lot more. You know, as researchers, we often have to break terms of service in order to get data and alert Facebook to the fact, well, I'm picking on Facebook again, but any platform, Facebook or the other platforms, what's going on their own platforms. They're making some investments in their security and research areas, but generally the best way to get something taken down on Facebook is to alert a reporter or a researcher who will tell the folks on the privacy and security teams there, and that's very sad. So if that's going to be how it's going to be, they need to open up the platforms so that we can do better work and not have to kind of skulk around in those creepy basements, but get access that actually, you know, is more holistic. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. We're going to continue to have to rely on their narratives about their takedowns and things like that for the next couple of years, unless it's mandated by some sort of regulation that requires outside audits and things like that.
Where the, you know, if we're working in media or in think tanks or editing, what do you think are the best practices when we encounter misinformation in the wild? When
that's a great question.
Report on it or encounter family members who are victims of misinformation?
Yeah, okay, so 3 questions there, I think. 1, what are best practices for reporting and talking about it? 2, what should we do? What's our kind of duty as citizens? And 3, how do you talk to your friends and family? So on the first question, I think there is always a cost benefit analysis that we need to do. There was a recent New York Times article, probably in May, if I'm not mistaken, that talked about Russian health disinformation. And the entire article was pinned to this one kind of fringe Twitter site or Twitter account and website that I think had 5,000 followers or something like that. And the account, the New York Times story kind of made it seem like this was like a pivotal Russian disinformation vector. Actually, by writing about it in the paper of record, they probably amplified this account beyond its wildest dreams. So we have to make that cost-benefit analysis. Not every piece of disinformation deserves a debunk. And in fact, by debunking some of these more fringy sites, we sometimes are kind of adding fuel to the fire. So that's different in every case. We need to, you know, I think weigh the harm that that piece of content or that vector of disinformation is doing to public discourse, public safety, public health, and then decide whether or not to report on it in each individual context, which can be quite burdensome. Regarding individual responsibility, I have been telling everyone that I think they should be practicing informational distancing in addition to social distancing right now. A lot of disinformation, as I mentioned before, runs on emotional manipulation. So if you feel yourself becoming emotional because of a piece of content that you've consumed online, the best thing you can do is walk away, close your computer, put down your cell phone, think about, you know, what that vector is, why this particular organization or reporter is pushing that narrative. And then, you know, if you feel like you need to do a little bit of research after that, there's some easy heuristics that you can conduct. You can look at the author, see if they've shared or written anything else similar to that. Look at the site. Does the site have a masthead, an editorial masthead that is, you know, filled out with actual human beings, or are they, as we've been seeing increasingly frequently, AI generated individuals? Does that site, you know, report on anything else similar? Do they have an address, a phone number? And is anyone else, especially at times of crisis, is anyone else reporting that piece of information? Because that's a good indicator. If, you know, something seems off, then and no one else is reporting on it, it's probably not true. Another similar tactic you can use is to copy and paste a short blurb from the text and drop it into Google. This is a way to uncover the monetary disinformation that we see. So a lot of these sites will just be cut and pastes across multiple different monetary-based fake news sites. And so if you get a bunch of sites that say the exact same thing, that's a great indication that there's a problem there. Also, some of the, you know, on the kind of more malign side, there's often just rote cut and pastes from various vectors of disinformation as they make their way into the mainstream. And then I encourage everyone to learn how to do a reverse image search in order to see if images are being misattributed, especially during crisis times. Again, I know everyone here in Washington has seen that picture of a shark in the Potomac every time hurricane season comes along. If you know how to reverse image search, you will see that that is a photoshopped image. You'll see the first time it came up because it will show you the first instance of that image on the internet. You can do that through Google. But there's some other more powerful tools you can do it through. It's just not quite as easy. You can't just right click and do it, but it's something that I encourage everybody to do because we're seeing, I mean, Russia all the time uses images from the Balkans to, characterize stuff that's going on in Ukraine. This is just a good tool to have a gut check about the visual information you're consuming, which is often more powerful than text. And then the final thing I would say for individuals, you need to learn how to report on platforms. So both Twitter and Facebook have added options to report false news. They've added options to report what you think is a fake account. These are all useful things because unfortunately, in the absence of both of these platforms making bigger investments, they're relying on artificial intelligence to make preliminary decisions for them. So the more we can help the algorithm be trained, the better. So most people actually don't report false news when they see it. So we need to do that. In terms of friends and family, I think the best thing to do, and there's a lot of articles written about this, people who say it more eloquently than me and who have studied it from a psychological perspective, but especially online, if you see something that has been shared that's, kind of off, I recommend approaching people with empathy in a private space, whether that's a DM or picking up the phone and talking through like, oh, I saw that article that you shared. Why did you share it? Like not immediately saying this is false, here's the Snopes link, because most people who have bought into this sort of thinking won't like Snopes or PolitiFact or any of these sites anyway. But talking through it and saying, okay, I have a different view. Here's a link to something else that I've seen, it says this and that. Appealing to their humanity is important. If you do it in public, people tend to dig in and they're a lot less likely to listen to you with kind of open eyes and open ears. I think that's the most important thing. I see just a lot of flame wars happening online right now. And I think if we bring the humanity back to those discussions, that's important. I think it's also important to note that there are some people whose minds you just aren't going to change, and that's okay. It's not your job to change the world. But if you can have a, productive conversation with someone, I think it is worth doing.
Outside of some of the official agencies, what organizations do you know of that are best at spotting and perhaps providing early warnings on some of these state disinformation campaigns?
I think the Digital Forensics Research Lab at Atlantic Council is doing a good job at that. I will say that with the caveat that they have early access and more access to some of the data that Facebook has. They have an agreement where Facebook basically tips them off to takedowns. So they get a first gander at things before they are inevitably removed. But I think their analysis is quite good. We've run into, in Ukraine especially, there's a famous organization called Stop Fake, which was one of the first fact-checking organizations related to Russian disinformation. I think, especially in the post-Soviet environment, there is a tendency for these organizations to become politicized, and that was evident for me during the 2019 election in Ukraine. I hope we don't see that continuously being the case in the United States as well. I think it's really important for these organizations to kind of maintain political distance and nonpartisanship. I'm trying to think. First Draft News, so they do a little bit less of spotting disinformation, and they're more kind of on the training end of things. But if anybody on the call is in media, they offer trainings on various parts of open source analysis and disinformation kind of technique in terms of research. So they're really great. Bellingcat, though, they're kind of gold standard for open source research, particularly on disinformation and intelligence matters. They are the guys who uncovered Russian culpability for MH17. They've also traced the 2 Russian spies who poisoned Sergei Skripal in London, and they offer open source techniques. In fact, so they've got a small staff, but most of their folks are volunteers. So you too can uncover Russian crimes on the internet if you like.
Glenn, I see, has politely digitally raised his hand, so I'll turn it over to him.
I wanted to ask you, Nina, if we could just switch gears for a moment and talk about your experience in Ukraine. You were advising the Ukrainian government on strategic communications. It is my impression that the Russians are quite skilled at strategic communications, and that Ukraine is probably relentlessly on the front line of that type of operation. I don't want to characterize the nature of your work there, but I was hoping you might shed some light on what you did and what did you learn, having been in a situation where I'm guessing a large part of their attention span is devoted to responding or trying to counter or maybe even take initiative in the strategic comms battle with Russia. And I'm wondering if you might just share any thoughts on your observations from your time doing that job.
Yeah, it was a difficult year, and I learned a ton. I think the thing I was most impressed with was just the Ukrainian public servants' commitment to their jobs. They make very, very little money, and most of them are highly educated people who could easily go work for, any consulting firm that's in Ukraine or some of the big tech firms that have moved there now, and make tons of money, especially on the Ukrainian pay scale. But instead, they're making like $300 or less a month. Because they are so committed to representing their country and making sure that Ukraine has a European kind of identity, especially in the foreign affairs space. So I was incredibly impressed with them, but the challenges that they face are many, not just the onslaught of information from Russia, but they've inherited a very bureaucratic, slow-moving system in terms of how information gets cleared. So I'm sure if there are folks who have not only worked in congressional offices, but anywhere in the US government, you're familiar with the clearance process. Imagine your worst clearance process in the USG, it's 10 times worse in Ukraine. We would get press inquiries from foreign press. If my boss, the spokesperson, didn't have already cleared lines on that, she would have to go through this ridiculous, circuitous clearance process where she would say, okay, this question has been filed. One of the girls in the press service would write up a memo that would go to the director of the relevant department, whether that was Africa, Europe, whatever. It would have to be filed by that person's secretary, basically. Then it would sit on that person's desk until they had time to respond to it. Then it had to kind of make its way back to the press service, which was in a physically different building. And it couldn't happen via email. This was all stuff that happened physically with paper. It would take an act of parliament to change this process. So it often took 2 weeks from start to finish, by which time, the news had moved on and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs hadn't commented. It also was clear that the Ukrainian press service was much more used to working reactively rather than proactively in terms of responding to events, but also responding to what Russia was putting out. And that was something that I and other foreign advisors tried to help them get on the front foot with, but it's really difficult because, as you said, it's just this onslaught on a daily basis that they're dealing with, not only from actual Russian outlets, but then the narratives that sneak their way into the Western press as well. So it was a question of what's worth responding to, what's worth leaving aside, what do we have the resources for. This was for most of the time I was there, a 4-person team in the press service of a country of 40 plus million people that was at war with a huge neighbor. So really, really high stakes and just incredibly committed people. In terms of what my job was, much less glamorous than it sounds, I'm afraid, although everyone likes to, my critics on Twitter especially like to imagine what I did while I was there. I did a lot of translation of their press statements from Ukrainian to English. I helped them draft and place op-eds for the minister. I helped my boss launch a blog for the stuff that, you know, she wanted to speak out about, but wouldn't be at the level of a ministerial op-ed. Helped her kind of wade through and respond to some of the aggressive messages and tweets that she got. And in general, just tried to help them coordinate not only within their own government, but with all the many, many, many foreign advisors who are in Kyiv, very rightly so, to make sure that there wasn't duplication of efforts between other kind of press departments around the government. And I hope I had an impact. The most important thing for a Fulbright, any Fulbright fellowship, whether you're doing a teaching fellowship, a research fellowship, or these public policy ones, is to build mutual understanding. And that was clearly something that was, I mean, it had such an impact on me. Ukraine is my second home, and the folks who I worked with on a daily basis there, I keep in touch with to this day. And, you know, I would have them over my house anytime. So, or vice versa if I travel. And that's the most important thing. These programs, I think, in and of themselves are counter disinformation efforts. And that's why, you know, investing in exchanges again and in people, I think is a huge benefit for the United States, and the return on investment is huge.
Thank you.
A question we have too, and I'm following up on your experience in Eastern Europe and your study of it, Central Europe as well. In dealing with countries that have Russian language minorities, support for Russian language education, how do you do it in a way that you avoid Balkanization of communities as well? How do you balance that concern?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something Ukraine deals with a lot. Now, I'm going to leave aside things that have been happening in Ukraine in recent months and kind of the slow degradation of the Zelensky administration, and talk about their language policy, which I actually think is pretty good. So the Poroshenko administration, the guy who preceded Zelensky, was pretty pro-Ukrainian language. I understand that Ukrainian identity is really important during these times when they are at war. I think it is a mischaracterization to talk about Ukraine as if it is divided in half. There are plenty of, you know, Russian-speaking Ukrainian patriots. Some of them I worked with at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In fact, a lot of the higher ups in Ukrainian bureaucracy were educated in Russia or you know, born into Russian-speaking families, which is kind of a legacy of the Soviet influence. But there are plenty of people who speak both languages. Some only speak one. That doesn't, you know, it's not a reflection on your identity as a Ukrainian. And the Poroshenko administration really leaned into pro-Ukrainianization, which, again, understandable. You want people to speak your national language, but it didn't do outreach to particularly the Donbass, where Russia is occupying with its separatist forces, and Crimea in Russian. It did them in Ukrainian, and I think that's a mistake. You can do outreach easily in both languages. Again, most people speak both, and especially in terms of, you know, at-risk populations, it's better not to offend them by speaking a language that they might not be as fluent in your official communications. And the Poroshenko administration invested in a Ukrainian language TV channel that broadcasted out there, but they weren't investing in Russian language stuff. And the Zelensky administration has started doing that. And he, of course, is a Russian speaker himself. His Ukrainian actually has come a long way since when he announced his candidacy, which I personally think is endearing. But if you talk to people, you know, some people don't think that being Ukrainian is about which language you speak. So I think it's important to meet people where they're at, and especially when it means, you know, allowing them another source of information that otherwise the competition would be the much more powerful Russian state-run media. It's worth doing. And then you can invest in kind of an inclusive language policy where, you know, you make Ukrainian language a requirement, but you're also offering classes in Russian, you're offering all of these things, which is basically what Estonia has done for some of its kindergartens. It's done dual language kindergartens or schools, but for a certain group of people, they still just need the only Russian language stuff, and they need a degree to get further in their life. So I don't think there's a Balkanization problem if it's pursued the right way. And I think Canada, for instance, is a good model for that.
As I look at the clock, we're getting towards the end here, but thinking to the future where technological changes, deep fakes, new ways of creating falsehoods, at the same time, AI, persistent surveillance, discussions. Candidates said, I avoided deepfakes simply by having someone record me 24/7 type of approaches. What do you see as the future of this, and building that in ways to look forward?
Yeah, I guess I am not as worried about deepfakes as everyone else for two reasons. One, the tools that are available, actually I'll say three reasons. The tools that are available to most people right now are pretty rudimentary. We've seen some of the deepfakes that have been shared this campaign season, and they are, to the naked eye, clearly manipulated. That doesn't mean they don't have an effect. In fact, because they are parody or some sort of kind of funny content, sometimes they can travel even faster. But that aside, they haven't gotten that good yet for just the normal average Joe or Jane. The second thing is that the stuff that's still the most popular on the internet is cheap fakes, right? It's just the same memes that we've been seeing, misattributed photos, sloppy pictures with text or sloppy edit jobs. I was seeing a lot while I was tracking disinformation around the George Floyd protests. Folks were sharing a photoshopped image of the protester, the elderly man who got knocked down in Buffalo, and saying that he had a tube running to his ear that shot out fake blood. It was clearly manipulated image. And so this is the stuff that's still gaining traction most frequently, and we've not figured out how to deal with that. So the deepfake problem is a step beyond, but I think that's still the most visceral, fast traveling content on the web. And then third, people are thinking about deepfakes. So if you talked about disinformation in 2012 or 2013, right, we wouldn't be having this sort of in-depth conversation back then. But we're having that conversation about deepfakes now. In fact, I am part of Adobe's content authenticity initiative, which they're running with Twitter and the New York Times. And Adobe, of course, runs the software, creates the software that the most sophisticated deepfakes are created with. So they have a responsibility to figure out how to stop this stuff. And they're talking about, I think, having a really thoughtful discussion with leaders in academia and industry and human rights work, which is a key part, about how to stem this without stemming free expression, without endangering people's privacy, because one of the things that you can do to counter deepfakes is to basically give a certificate to images, and you'll see who the owner of that image is, who created it initially. But we don't want an activist in Burma to take that risk if it's going to mean that they're, a target of their government as a result. So they're thinking through that stuff. The Times is involved to think through how it affects journalism, because obviously images that we see online are in media are edited, and Twitter is looking at it from the social media perspective. And I'm encouraged so far. A lot of it is about awareness and education. So perhaps it's just that they're talking about things that are near and dear to my heart, but they do seem to have not only the technological solution that they're thinking about, but the human solution as well. But what else am I worried about? I'm worried about just more rote manipulation of our uncertainties. So especially heading into the election, this isn't very far afield. Given that it's going to take longer to count ballots this year, I think we just need a lot more messaging right now about the fact that we all need to be patient on election night, and perhaps for a day or two afterward. In most other countries, election results aren't instantaneous, and we just need to message to everyone that this does not mean there's anything wrong with the democratic process. This is how it is going to be this year. I think that's really important. And then farther afield, again, I still think these cheap fakes are a problem. It is how we're being manipulated. These fissures in our societies are the key to our vulnerability. And until we turn inward and repair them, we're going to remain vulnerable for manipulation from both domestic and foreign sources of disinformation.
Well, let me just say thank you, Nina. As we get to the end of our time here, we appreciate you spending this hour with us. We at CSPC relate very well to many of the comments you made today, particularly about the strength of the American democracy and what we need to do to fix that. Some of those recommendations being quite urgently addressed to the election timeframe, and in helping the American public understand how these dynamics are going to be affected during the time of COVID. We're also advocating very strongly for additional resources for absentee balloting. And I think you've raised a really good point about helping people change their mentality towards the expectation on that and what's normal. So we appreciate that, but also thank you for your activism on this question of information fidelity and American faith in institutions. Thank you for doing the work on the book. The book is How to Lose the Information War, Russia, Fake News, and the Future of Conflict. I suspect through reading the book and listening to your comments today, we have also learned some useful ideas about how to draw or not lose the information war here if we put the will behind the recommendations that you've made. I do want to do a quick plug for Joshua Huminski's review of the book. I recommend folks take a look at that and check out How to Lose the Information War. Nina Jankowicz, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.